it seems like it's hard to go around and just earn a bunch of trust in my organization. But being accountable is one of the fastest ways to earn trust, because in that moment, our instinct is deflect. Just deflect this. Hide, because you might get away with it. That's the toddler in us being like, what if I just don't admit to eating the candy?
Exactly what you just said, right? Being able to build trust is an accelerant. And one of the best ways to activate that accelerant is just to start taking accountability.
It's Slackers, unscripted business insight from two lifelong builders. Jaime and Jonathan are here to show you how big ideas travel across industries. Consider it your weekly companion on the path to better work and a better way of working.
If you lead long enough, or honestly, if you've just been alive long enough, you start to notice a pattern. Whenever something goes wrong, a lot of people immediately start negotiating with reality. It wasn't my fault. It was the process. It was the market. It was the team. It was the timeline. Accountability becomes this really slippery thing. Something we admire, like in movies, in theory, but we avoid in practice. And the higher someone rises in power, the more allergic they often become to owning the outcomes they create. I mean, we're watching it play out at the highest levels of government right now in our daily lives. We see it in organizations all the time. We have all worked with someone who treats accountability like a contagious disease they're determined not to catch. But here is the rub, and this is the part that not a lot of people tell you early in the career. If you want to build trust fast, if you want to get promoted, if you want to be the person leaders bet on, accountability is the accelerant. Not the soft kind, not the corporate kind, but the intense kind. The kind that says, hey, put this on me. The outcome is mine. I own the decision. I own the miss. I own the path forward. That level of ownership is rare today. And because it's rare, it's incredibly valuable. So today, we're getting into this. Why accountability feels risky, why it's actually the safest long-term bet you can make, and how people who step into intense accountability end up shaping culture, accelerating trust, and becoming indispensable. Jonathan, it's good to see you, brother. Always good to be on the line. Talk to me about a moment in your career when you first realized that owning the whole thing, even the part you didn't like, actually made people trust you some more.
Yeah, this is kind of a funny topic in some ways, because in my career, I've been one of these people who, if somebody offers me a challenge, I just take it. So what that tends to put you in situations where you're generally unprepared a lot. You're just like, yep, I could do this. And then you have to go figure out how to do it. And in some ways, early in my career, as really a junior product manager, I had no idea what I was doing. I got kind of thrust into the role that I accepted. I was excited about it, but I honestly had no idea what a product manager did. And I learned very quickly that being a product manager meant guiding a team to success on a pretty complicated journey. I didn't have really any of the tools. I'd never really trained or learned or even mentored with a product manager. I really was going into it ice cold. And in some ways, that was an opportunity for me because I didn't know what the blueprint was. All I knew was like, I got a bunch of people who have really disparate expertise and I need to round them up, and we have to do something pretty hard that might take as much as a year to get done. And we're going to have to land that plane because this is a product that has to ship, and it has to ship on time. Part of that was really just communicating with the team and being really aware of what's going on. And as the product manager, I felt it was my responsibility in the moment to be accountable for everything that was going on with that project. And while we've all, I think, experienced, and maybe even like literally today, there's people listening who are like, this literally happened to me today, which is there's people around us, people on our team, people we work with who are very quick to find any other reason why something didn't go right than they just didn't do the right thing in the right moment. And you talk about that. So the allergic nature of just being honest and saying, you know what? Yeah, I was on the hook for this and it didn't go as planned. That's on me. That's actually a pretty rare thing. And early in my career, it was extremely rare. I worked with some awesome people. We were aligned, culturally as a team. So it was one of these where we kind of had each other's backs, and that accountability came a little natural in that environment, because one thing I didn't realize is by handpicking my own team, which was a luxury that not every product manager gets, I was able to work with people who I trusted, they trusted me, and accountability comes a little more naturally when the person to your left and the person to your right is somebody you're ready to go to battle with. And you know that if something's going wrong, somebody else is going to have your back. Almost all of us can agree that that's uncommon. And as I moved on, I started to realize that there's kind of three types at a high level. There's like three types of people that live in that accountability lane. You're going to have the people who just will not be accountable no matter what the circumstance is, just will not take ownership for something that was absolutely their responsibility. And we all know those folks. There's some of it is it's just the way they are, and sometimes it doesn't ever change. And then there's the folks who are willing to be accountable, but it's uncomfortable. They're not, when instructed, if you pin them down, Jamie, did you reach the task? Did you do the thing on time? When pressed, they'll be like, nope, I didn't. I went the wrong way. I did the wrong thing. I pushed the wrong button. I learned from my mistake. I'm ready it won't happen again. Those folks that are there. And then there's the people who just go out of their way all the time, which is like, I'm accountable for all my stuff. I'm not going to let my teammates take the fall for something I did. I'm certainly not going to go out of my way to blame somebody else for something I had control over or that I even had a hand in. And I will always speak up, even unprompted, to be accountable for those things. And it's understanding some of the dynamics of all of that. You can start to employ some tactics where you start to easily identify which of those people are which, and then what are the ingredients for the team that just keeps winning.
It's one of the reasons I was excited to get into this topic, for the pod, is because I think the topic of accountability is a topic where you can really get to some meaty tactical things you could do today if you just decided to do it as a leader or, to your point, as a part of a team as well. So it's a great topic to get into playbook type stuff. No, here's some takeaways. Go try this today, right? And I think part of why we wanted to get here is we wanted to encourage, people listening to go try some stuff. Because I think one of the things that you just have to walk right smack into with this topic through the lens of leadership, whether you are trying to step into a leadership role and grow and become more of that, or whether you already are, is the moment you step into leadership, right, you give up the luxury of excuses. We all know leaders who haven't. I mean, and those stories are entertaining. We can go on that, tangent all day long. But the great leaders, the effective leaders, the leaders who really help their team or even themselves, if they have to, pump their own gas, just punch above their weight class, they understand that's just a luxury that that's not an offer anymore. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of what people bump into, and maybe folks can relate to this, is there are a lot of leaders who want influence without the ownership piece of it, even in micro kind of examples. And that's really tough. I mean, I think of, just to riff on your kind of product piece, I've been a part of product teams. I've been in various roles in product teams where we're doing everything from strategic exercises, what should we build and why, and all that, into the weeds of just tactical X's and O's, how are we actually making this thing? And we're deep in the trenches of UX and UI and product requirements and user stories and all that sort of stuff. And I can think of countless moments where you have a senior executive kind of come in at the last minute and kind of look at the body of work and go, oh, yeah, I don't know about all this. Or, you know what, like this whole piece over here, you get those moments, you go, man, do you remember that meeting up front where we were in it and you were at the table and we all kind of went around and said, like, how are we feeling about this? We shared all this information with you. And I get it. You're busy. It's not always, there's not enough time to do it. But in software development land, let's say, a lot of times you hear that talked about is just thrash, like thrash early, thrash up front, do all that because it's cheap to thrash up front. It's really expensive to thrash later. And I guess that's kind of what comes to mind as I'm listening to you talk, is one of those accountability kind of pieces you could think about as a tactical thing is, before you get started on a project, make sure you understand there's a lot of value in thrashing, that work of getting into the edge cases, trying to feel all four walls of your thing with the cast of characters that you're going to embark on this work with, whatever the project is. There's a lot of value in that kind of upfront thrash, because it helps not only just flesh out the thing, but it sort of sets the table for these accountability conversations. Because you want to be able to say, no, we were there. This was the moment. This was the milestone we put on the calendar to go do this type of work, because it's cheap. It's cheap when we do it here up front. It's very expensive and costly later, to go have all of this at the end. But that's one of those, I think, unfortunate artifacts of leadership when, you want influence, but you don't want the ownership of the thing. And that can be tough as a team. I mean, have you ever felt something like that? I mean, is that?
Yeah, I mean, it happens all the time. And I think that's one of those things where in those moments when you're thrashing early or fail fast or all the things that people will say around that, where you want to make those mistakes up front, get it all on the table. That's also where you want to figure out, who are my stakeholders? Who are my owners? Who owns the stuff? Because if you walk out of a meeting like that and we're all trying to figure out what is it we're doing, and if every person who has ownership of some piece of that, if they don't walk out of that knowing that they are the owners of those things, that it can put you in a really difficult spot. And it seems really basic to be like, all right, well, who owns this and who owns that and who owns this? But it's remarkable how often those sessions break up and you don't have that. You don't walk out with everybody knowing exactly what they own. It's hard to be accountable if you don't know what you own in the first place, right? It's like, oh, Jaime, from my seat, looks like you kind of dropped the ball on this thing. And so I'm going to put that on you. I want you to be accountable for this. And you're like, nobody ever told me I was the owner of this thing. Like, seems a little unfair that I'm going to get, stuck with that. But, somebody who embraces that will be like, okay, I will take ownership for the fact that I should have spoke up. Like, if I didn't know what I owned, I shouldn't have got this far into the project before raising my hand and be like, all right, what do I own in this project that I need to be accountable for later? Because that's kind of, that's grabbing that opportunity to be accountable in a moment, rather than say, well, that person over there never told me I was the owner of this thing, right? Like, deflecting in that moment is still missing the mark, right? Because there's always the opportunity to be accountable for something, unless you were like, hey, I walked out of the room, I've got receipts, it shows I own this thing, and this is what I own, and I will absolutely be accountable for everything that was pinned on me and all these various phases of the project. But that thing we just talked about, I do not own that. And we need to find the owner of that to figure out what's going on. Outside of that, it's really just kind of, making sure that you understand who owns what, and you're checking in along the way with those owners to find out how it's going. And one of the surest ways to get the real impact of accountability inside of a team or an organization or whatever is you pick that milestone and you sit everybody down. All right, we're going around the table. Owners, tell everyone what you could have done better at this point in the game, right? Wherever we are right now. I want everybody to go around and say, this is really what I could have done that would have helped this project out in a fundamental way, and I just didn't. But I've learned from it. I understand what to do forward. I ask some questions, or I may have questions. I'm ready to move forward and not have that be a mistake or that be something I do in the future. And as you go around the room, it kind of forces everybody to reflect on that. And yet there's always going to be some slippery folks in the room that will find a way to say, what I could have done better is if Jaime hadn't done such a bad job, then my project would have been better. And you're like, well, that's not really being accountable at all, right? Like, it's just deflecting blame everywhere you can. But when you do it and everybody responds to that question in that way of, this is what I could have done better, there's a moment that happens there that's really, really important. If you're doing this in practice, start with the person who you know is going to be absolutely transparent about their accountability, that they're going to put it right on the table. This is what I could have done better. This is probably where I caused some friction into the process or hurt the team in some way or caused delays or whatever. I'm going to put it right out there. When that person goes first, what you find right away is who the real stars on your team are, because you're going to have people say, now, hold on a minute. I appreciate you doing that. I appreciate you saying that you were responsible for that thing that caused us so much grief back in 3 weeks ago on the project. But me and my team put you in that spot, and we know it. Like, it's just not reasonable for you to sit there and say you're taking all of the weight of that misstep in our project or whatever it was that caused it to not go as smoothly as possible. When you see the other folks in the team They start volunteering. That I didn't have to say that at that moment. Jaime just took all the credit for that misstep. That was a big failure in our project, and Jaime just took all of the accountability for that. I could just let him do that and we could move on. But the real magic is when the people say, no, my team was just as guilty as that. We just were in front of you. I'll say this, everybody who's ever done QA in their life knows what it's like to get the hot potato at the end of a project and be like, well, QA dropped the ball, so we can't launch on time, even though we gave them 7 hours to QA something. They thought they were going to have 6 weeks to test. It's pushing that blame down the line where a lot of times certain groups just get left holding the bag all the time. But when we're truly accountable for what we own and we support our team members in the things they're accountable for, it builds bonds. This goes back to culture in a big way. As a leader, as a member of the team, as you look around the room, you're like, I've got a couple people here that just refuse to be accountable. These folks are not the kind of team players that we need in this organization. I've got a handful of people who are absolutely willing to be accountable, but they have not quite got comfortable enough to just volunteer blame when someone else is willing to take the fall for it. And then you're going to have the people that are not only wholly transparent and accountable for their own missteps, but they're very quick to support other people who are like, no, that wasn't entirely on you. And not when you're blaming other people, but when you yourself can take credit for part of that and say, that wasn't totally on you. I had a hand in that too. The strength that builds and the teamwork that builds, the culture blocks that you're starting to assemble are super powerful. It's a way healthier way to assess a project at a particular moment with the owners of that project. And it's going to start isolating the people who just cannot be accountable, no matter what you try and do to bring that to the table.
What I find so fascinating about all of that as well, because 100%, the breadth of what you just unpacked as far as the value for individuals and for teams and organizations in leaning into this topic is significant. But that critical upstream piece, the starting point, right, is this notion of ownership. And none of the kind of stuff that follows is possible unless you start with that. So I think as people who are a part of teams, there's real work to be done to establish ownership around tasks and projects and areas of the business, areas of the organization. So there's this whole conversation of ownership that's upfront. I mean, certainly if you're in a position of leadership, right? But most people in companies are not the CEO or the founder. Most people are not. And it's just about acknowledging, like, you don't need permission to take responsibility and to take ownership. You can choose to do that. Sometimes, to your point, maybe effective leaders acknowledge that they need to set the table and sort of set the tone and encourage the conditions to present themselves for people to feel safe to do that, because we're not exactly hardwired as humans to want to do that naturally, because ownership is Latin for I might be dead. Because if I own a thing, then there's a high degree of possibility that my thing might fail. And that failure might mean that I'm dead in some physical or metaphorical sense. It's why this topic, I know we hear people with military backgrounds and people who operate in high stakes careers talk about accountability, because certainly the outcomes in those high stakes scenarios are life and death in many cases. But for a lot of us, they're not. But boy, our psychology convinces us that they are. If you didn't get the color right on the button on the landing page for the opt-in thing for whatever, it's probably going to be okay. Like, it's not nearly the same. But it somehow still comes with that emotional torture of, oh man, I don't really want to be the guy or the gal who owns making the decision on the color of the button, because what if I get it wrong? And that's kind of what we're arguing for here. That's the point. The point is to create conditions within an organization where people understand that not only is ownership expected and it's part of the job description, that it's going to be okay, because there are forces beyond all of our control that are going to occur. And what's most important is that someone said, yes, I will own this first, because ownership allows us to have all those conversations you were just saying. And boy, that's when you start looking at your team going, we're really humming here, because I'm starting to trust those individuals. Because Stacy over here, she said, you know what, I'll own the button color decision. And then we all had to come back and look at it's live in the world. And we're like, I don't know, that actually doesn't work. We're getting a lot of negative feedback about the color of the button. And you know what? Stacy's okay. And she's all right. And we have a conversation about what that meant and everything that goes through. But that's a good thing. And I just think there's a difference between leadership being viewed as an authority figure and just having power or authority, or being defined as, well, I'm on the top of the org chart. And instead, acknowledging that it's really about pivoting to, hey, I'm just willing to go first and I'm willing to own the outcome. And that is on offer for everyone in any part of an organization if you choose to.
Yeah. And I will say, and I mean, we have to acknowledge this too, gross incompetence is still, you could be as accountable as you want. And if the end result is gross incompetence, you still may die, right? Like, to use your metaphor, right? Like I still may not survive whatever the problem was, yeah, just want to let everybody know this probably would have gone better if I hadn't embezzled all that money. And now we can't launch the product like we thought, right? Like,
that is true.
You can't just be accountable for gross incompetence and have it just swept under the rug and be like, all right, well, no, let's not do that again. Thanks for volunteering that piece of information. Obviously, our tendency sometimes when it comes to being accountable is that fear of that, like, what if my accountability that I'm putting out there is perceived as incompetence? And that's where a lot of this has to come from. What did you do when that happened? As we sit around in this, this virtual conversation that we're talking about here, is that we're at a moment in time at the end of the project, a key milestone. We're at a moment in time that matters. And this is probably not the first time you've considered this thing that you've been asked about, right? You were like, now that I think about it, I probably did do something that was detrimental to the project. You already know. And so being able to put that out there with and this was the thing I learned, and this is how I know we can avoid it in the future. Like, that's all really a key part of it. And then the reason I say all that is that the leader, which could be, when we talk about leaders too, to your point, right? We're not always talking about CEOs. That would be a small audience of people when we look at leaders. A leader could be a project manager. A leader could be a product manager. A leader could be a creative director. I mean, it could be anybody who's working with a group of folks and you've got ownership of a bigger piece, whatever that may be. But what you can't do is go around and ask everybody to be accountable for the thing they did and then punish them for it. Like, this just can't be the way, right? Like, you have to embrace the fact that we're all going to put a bunch of ugly stuff out here and we're only talking about ourselves. That's the only thing we can talk about. We can only talk about ourselves. When we do that, the end result can't be the leader being going like, well, I thought you guys failed miserably on this thing, and I certainly don't want any of you going forward, so you're all fired. Like, that can't be the outcome. There's a lot of trust that has to come from that because we have fears. It's a very human thing to be afraid to admit that you did something that wasn't the best thing. And I mean, we see it from, I don't care if you're 2 years old or you're 80 years old, those can be uncomfortable things to say, yep, I did a thing that wasn't a good thing, and I'm going to just put it out there for everybody to react to. We're just inherently guarded about that. But when you're in an environment where you can do it, your team supports it, your leadership supports it, the strength that comes out of that is huge.
So what's kicking around in my head now is, we're having this conversation oriented around, individuals and people, but companies as entities wrestle with this as well. I mean, where my head went while I was listening to you talk there was about when you have like a PR crisis on your hands, where you have a misstep in the public, markets that's visible, how you watch companies operate and flail and still kind of go through all of these twisting themselves in knots to kind of navigate their way through a PR nightmare. I'm sitting here thinking of, so a lot of you never want a crisis to emerge, but it's easy to think in the music world, how often there have been fire drills because some piece of music has been made public before it was supposed to be, or some publicity image was released before it was approved, or some version of, oh my gosh, like the sky is falling right now because there's been a mishandling of confidential, secret, high-profile product from insert major artist that everyone on earth knows. And holy moly, now we've just stepped in it. And it's amazing to see how there is no real, at least from my vantage point, consistent universal playbook for how a company is supposed to acknowledge when they've made a mistake, or maybe they've just stepped in it. I mean, we've seen all kinds of versions of that. We see that obviously with individuals, but it's probably a conversation that's worth having at that corporate entity level. How are we going to handle? So maybe I'll put that to you. I mean, how should a company handle when you've made a mistake, when you've misfired publicly?
I mean, a lot depends on the mistake. We've all seen companies that make catastrophic mistakes, right? Like it's not just, hey, the album leaked. It's that, hey, we grossly insulted a whole group of people, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, or we took a position on something that was just dead wrong, and our customers are fleeing as a result of this. Like they object to what we did. Some of them can be pretty difficult. Now, almost always, your best bet is still own it. Be honest with your customers, be honest with the public, be honest with your stakeholders, whatever it might be, which is, this is what happened and this is what we're doing about it. And if there's apologies that have to happen, then you go that. The other part of it is, absent the gross incompetence that we were talking about before, or malicious incompetence, where somebody's sabotaging something, they're actually doing bad things. If everybody's doing their best and being accountable for it, and you know who the owners are, and you know what the structure of the organization is, this is where the real leaders shine, right? Because this rolls up. Nobody's throwing anybody under the bus. Nobody's going back to their team. Like, who can we blame for this? Like, who could we just fire and say that we did that and now everything's okay, right? There's a lot of people that operate like that. Like the government does it all the time, but we see it with private as well, which is that get a fall guy, throw him under the bus, blame them, and say our company doesn't believe in this thing. There's no way this is ever going to happen again. That is a playbook that a lot of people run, and it is as disingenuous as it comes. It doesn't feel right. If you're a customer, it doesn't feel right. If you're a fan of the brand, it doesn't feel right. Sometimes it's enough to be like, I'm done. I'm out with this brand because of the way that they handled that. And we see it in our, inside the organizations as well. This is when the real leaders step up and be like, no, this is on me. Like whatever this was is on me. Because yes, nobody's perfect. Mistakes will happen. Somebody put the wrong thing in the wrong folder or whatever happened, and something got leaked that wasn't supposed to get leaked, but nobody did it on purpose. Nobody's trying to cause harm. It's something that we've now put safeguards in for. Yes, we did it, but we've put things in place that will ensure this won't happen again, because we understand the people who were harmed in a way that we can't necessarily make right for them. And we have to own that, right? Which is we understand we caused harm. We apologize profusely for the harm we caused. We've put all these measures in place to avoid this before, but we did it. We did that thing. And that's really the only position you could really take that's justifiable. You might get away with all kinds of stuff, as people do all the time. All right, we might be able to dodge a bullet here if we spin this thing in the right way and we point, distract people with the shiny thing over there and maybe throw a few people under the bus. We might get out of this somewhat unscathed. But you probably don't. There's going to be people who look at you being like, yeah, they didn't really do the right thing there. They took kind of a dirty way out of that, and we noticed. Just coming back to your question of a crisis, crisis, you have to really assess what caused the crisis in the first place. And if it was a malicious intent, you do have to take action, right? Like I have a person who sabotaged this project. They've been let go. We've taken whatever action we need to take. We still are accountable as an organization for not, being more prepared for this. And this is how we're going to avoid that kind of sabotage in the future. But outside of that, you just have to own it. And you have to make sure everybody understands what the impact of that was. And the leader at the top is the person who says, it's on me. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, that's right. It makes me think of, Scott Galloway, who, folks might have heard of, and you and I have talked about some of his work before. But, he has put forth as part of his, I think, brand strategy course at NYU, like a three-pillared approach to crisis management. And it's essentially like the top guy or gal takes responsibility. That's number one. Number two, acknowledge the issue. You say just what it is. And three, you overcorrect. And that sort of feels right. That sort of feels straightforward. And you think about how many times at an extreme level, we've seen companies over the years who I think have correctly handled a crisis kind of run a similar playbook. Oh, there's an outbreak of this bacteria in our food product or an item on the shelf that might be dangerous to people. We're clearing the shelves. Everything's coming off. Top guy or gal takes responsibility. We acknowledge it and we overcorrect to try to, repair and rebuild what we have. It's funny that can be a playbook for a large organization, but we don't often talk about how you bring that down into your own teams at a day-to-day level. And it's like, clearly there are business outcomes that benefit from an approach like that to a crisis. We've got to make sure our teams and the people within our organizations know that we're kind of aiming for the same thing. Not that we ever want to welcome or want a crisis to occur internally within our small teams or just over the course of emails back and forth about, whatever. But we're still talking about this notion of ownership. And we're still saying that at the highest levels and the smallest levels, the micro interactions, this notion of ownership and taking responsibility, it's a very powerful force. And there's an entire body of evidence that proves it out at the highest levels of sort of corporate operations, and obviously in extreme high risk, life or death, real situations, but also in just how we treat each other when we show up to our desk every day, or we show up, at the office, or we pull up to the laptop, to interact with the people that we are spending our time and our working hours interacting with. It's amazing to me how hard it is for some of those things that we can talk about here in a way that maybe seems straightforward and simple are just really emotionally difficult to do, which is, am I prepared today to own a thing? Am I a person who adopts a posture in the world of I'm looking to own things? Because that's maybe the other part of this conversation is this notion of accountability as an accelerant for your own career and your own growth personally and professionally, of just being that person that says, I'm not going to really sit around and wait for permission then to just go be told that I own a thing. I'm going to start looking for stuff I can own because I think I can do that. And I think maybe that's what the organization or this group might need from you right now.
Yeah, and I'll throw another thing out too, is we've talked before, when we talk about culture, trust comes up a lot. And we also talk about trust being something you have to earn. You have to earn trust. You don't just give it to somebody. And there may be few better ways to earn trust than to be accountable for what you've done. Because when you do, metaphorically, like we go around the room, when the first person talks about all of the things or the big thing or whatever else it might be that they could have done better, that person has earned trust from everyone else in the room in that moment, whether they know it or not. Because you're sitting there and be like, okay, yeah, that's what happened. And they're just putting it right out there. When I think about that person, my interactions with that person down the road, when they tell me something, I'm going to believe it because they don't dodge the ownership, right? The person who deflects every single time to a third party, to a vendor, to someone who's not in the room, whatever else it might be, I do not trust that person, right? And I see it in real time of this person is not being accountable for what they own. And when they tell me something later around the water cooler, down the hallway, or some other meeting, and they're like, oh yeah, this is the thing. I'm like, I don't know if I believe what that person's saying, because they don't take ownership and they're not accountable for the things that they do take ownership for. And yet the people who go around the room and put it all out there, and then even better, the other people who don't let them take the fall in its entirety, those people you trust implicitly. You know that person is credible. You know that when that person's on your team, or when they have to do something, or when they're on the hook for something, they're either going to get it done or they're going to tell you why they didn't get it done. But you will trust them. And if you get a whole room full of people who will be accountable for the things that they own, and they'll do it in real time with the folks on their team and throughout the organization, the trust that gets built in those moments is really strong. And it can be something that, that can be a trust building exercise. It could be a brand new team. This is the first time these guys have ever worked together. We're going to check in 1 month into it. All right, everybody, tell me what you could have done better in this first month to be on this. And all of a sudden, what do? You have trust fuel just flowing around the room that everybody's been like, oh yeah, that Jaime, he's so honest about everything he's doing. And he really puts it out there on the things he's accountable for. And I admire that. And by admiring that, I trust Jaime a little bit more. And when I need to depend on him, I'm going to feel better about it because I know that he's willing to be accountable for the things that he takes ownership for. Trust is one of those things that we all talk about. Like, well, if it's earned, it seems like it's hard to go around and just earn a bunch of trust in my organization. But being accountable is one of the fastest ways to earn trust and to make deposits of trust in with all of the people around you. Because in that moment, everybody knows our instinct is deflect. Just deflect this. Don't. Someone else might take the blame. Nobody will notice. Like, hide because you might get away with it. That's the toddler in us being like, what if I just don't admit to eating the candy? Like, maybe they'll never know I did. And yet.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I think that's the key to so much of this. If we are showing up, fully present and ready to do our best work as professionals, capital P professionals. We got to acknowledge that like that's a battle. That's a daily battle. No one's going to be perfect at this. It's not easy. You are going to have to intentionally and purposely wrestle with your lizard brain and all of those fears to really make that happen. And that's the work of the professional, is wrestle with those emotions so that you can push through. Because exactly what you just said, right? Being able to build trust is an accelerant. And one of the best ways to activate that accelerant is just to start taking accountability. And it's hard for me not to want to go down the rabbit hole of sports metaphors because it's easy to see that. But boy, my boys both play baseball. It's one of my favorite things about that sport in particular. But I would challenge anybody listening, the next time you watch anything on TV, any sports, game, whatever, watch the guys that take ownership of the play, of the misstep. The number of times, you just got beat by that ground ball. Guy comes up and goes, hey man, that's on me. That's on me. That's all it took. He didn't get up in the dugout and give a whole big speech and go do a thing. He just signaled to everybody else on that field, yep, that was on me. I got it. Next one, let's go. Little deposits to your point. So I don't know. If there's a thread running through all of this, man, I think it's that accountability. It's not about blame or punishment. It's about taking control of the things you can influence. Right? You don't need a title, you don't need permission, and you don't even need authority. You just need to be the person who says, I've got this. This part is on me. Because once you do that, the world has a pretty funny way of just handing you more stuff to own. Like trust compounds, like we just said, opportunities will show up. And before you know it, you're the person everyone turns to. Not because you asked for authority, but because you took responsibility. So if anything in this conversation resonated, I hope it's start small. Right? Own one decision, own one outcome.
Yeah. And I would say too, the one exercise we kind of talk about, we've been talking about here, it's very doable. You don't have to really have a big playbook. You don't need to read a bunch of textbooks. You don't need to go to a bunch of seminars or take a bunch of courses. Is take a moment with whoever's in your inner circle. This could even be something you do as a family, right? But let's say just corporate wise, sit with your team and take a moment to have everybody go around the room. What could you have done that would have made this project better, or this whatever it might be, that would have made it better? Go around the room. And you'll learn things really, really quickly. You're going to learn more about people in that moment. You're going to learn more about your team in that moment. You're going to start trusting more of your teammates more than you ever have before in that moment. And you might even validate that you've got some untrustworthy folks in the room. But it's a super valid exercise. It's really, really easy to do. It's something that just has to start with one person that says, I am accountable for this. I'm taking ownership for this. I'm putting it out there. And we're going to go around the room and everybody's going to do exactly the same thing. And you'll be amazed at the results.
That's it. That's the show. I think we landed the plane. Jonathan, it was good to see you as always, brother. Thank you for spending time with us again. This is Slackers. I'm Jamie.
Now I'm Jonathan.
We appreciate you being here. Check out the show notes for links to both of our work. Drop us a note. Say hello. We love it when people say hi. Send us a question. Don't be a stranger. Thank you for listening. This is Slackers. We'll see you next time.